Hi everyone, this is Jean-Noël from Immersive Storytelling. Today we're going to talk about a paper which is a reference in the interactive storytelling field. It was published in 2000 by Michael Young and is named Notes on the Use of Plan Structures in the Creation of Interactive Plot. Let's go! Everything starts with the claim that in almost every narrative theory, you can find the same key feature in the structure of the story. It is characterized hierarchically. At the lowest level, you have the fabula, then the story, and finally, at the highest level, the text. The fabula is the set of agents populating the story worlds and actions these agents can perform. These actions are linked together by causal and temporal links. Then there is the story. This is the plot which will actually be told to the reader. More precisely, it's a subset of fabulous events that will be conveyed to the reader in a particular order. Finally, at the highest level is the text. It is simply the medium through which the story is being told. For instance, it can be a movie or a book. In this characterization of the story, we can therefore find these following key notions. The notions of agents, the notion of actions these agents can perform, and the notion of events linked by causal and temporal relationships. And there is the magic. These notions are not new for artificial intelligence. That's more or less what the planning field is about. Let's define very simply what planning is. Planning allows us to define a domain, meaning a set of rules and actions, and from this domain, we can then define problems with an initial state and a goal state. The job of the planning algorithm is to find a plan allowing to go from initial state to goal state using only rules and actions defined in the domain. In fact, the idea that planning can be used to represent plot is not new, and was already suggested way back in the 70s. However, back in the days, the idea was limited by the earlier models of plan. Young suggests a new way, based on a representation of the causal structure of the story, which is at the same time rich and formal, meaning it can still be understood by a computer. The idea is the following: looking for every plan representing the plot that could satisfy the story and author's goal instead of just creating one plan. We talk about searching through the space of all possible plans. Knowing all the possible ways we can unfold the story, we've got a global context about the plot actually being created. Remember this, as it will be important later. This approach allows two things: the sharing of the plot control between the user and the system, and the modelization of suspense as experimented by the user. To do so, Young says you need two things. One, a declarative representation of the actions possible in the story world. And two, a program able to use this representation in order to create, modify and maintain the plan corresponding to the plot. Without going into too much details about the declarative representation of actions, just imagine that you need to say who is involved in the actions, its parameters, what preconditions need to be satisfied for the action to be performed, and what are the effects of the action. Let's talk about the software used to create, modify and maintain the plan representing the plot. This program itself is divided into parts. The first part generates the plan, meaning here the plot. The goal is of course to generate an interesting story according to the author's goal. The second part is in charge of monitoring the user's behavior inside the simulation and check if it deviates from the planned plot. Indeed, what to do if the user starts an action which could break the planned story. Let's take an example. Imagine that in the story, you have to escort a character, let's name it Bob, to a safe house. The arrival of this character to the safe house is the planned end of the story. Now imagine that in all the possible actions in the story world is the action to fire a gun at somebody. I think you know where I'm going with that. If you fire a gun at Bob and therefore kill him, that's a problem, because the story won't be able to reach its ending. Young proposes two ways to manage that. One, the system can prevent the user to deviate from the story. Or two, the system can adjust the story based on the new states of the story world. It means modifying the plan so that a coherent narrative is still possible even after what the user did. In our example, what could that mean? In the case where the system prevents the user to concretize its actions, it does an intervention. A possible intervention is simply to pretend that the user missed his shot, or that the gun was misfiring. In the case where the system adjusts the story, we can imagine multiple things depending on the possible actions in the story world and the author's goal. For instance, if healing is a possible action, the system could ask another character to heal Bob. Or the story goal could change, and the user's goal would not be to escort Bob to the safe house anymore, but instead to escape from the police and hide himself in a safe house without being caught. Virtually everything is possible. Of course, in reality, it opens many questions. When the system should intervene and how? How the system can detect that the user is performing an action going against the story goal? Then should the system prevent the user to perform his action, or should the system adjust the story? If the system prevents too often the user to perform its action, the risk is to break his illusion of control in the story world, and therefore to break the immersion. On the contrary, if the system always adjusts the plot, the global coherence of the story will be lost. It echoes one of the fundamental questions or conflict in interactive storytelling. What is the most important, author control or user agency? When author or narrative control is total, you are in a book or a movie, and it's not interactive storytelling. But when the user has total control, there is no more narrative coherence. It's a subtle equilibrium to find. Let's finish with the second proposition of the article, the modeling of suspense. In cognitive psychology, there is a theory that a reader reading fiction is acting as a problem solver. It means that the reader is looking for solutions to the hero's dilemma or conflicts. For instance, in a mystery novel, the reader will try to find who did the crime. In Romeo and Juliet, the reader will try to find solutions to the impossible love of the two main protagonists. Cognitive psychology tells us that suspense increases when the number of solutions the reader can find decreases. It's possible to translate this idea in the planning approach this way. If we start from the state of the world the user has in mind, how much plans, meaning stories, can we generate? That's why it's very important to not only generate one plan, but instead look inside the space of all possible plans. The idea here is to use the cognitive model of the user about his perception of the world and the knowledge he has of the story, in order to modelize the space of possible plans with the user knowledge as the starting point. The more solution plans are found, the less likely the user will experience suspense. This opens up many possibilities. For instance, we can imagine a system which, when it generates the story, has the suspense curve the author wants as a constraint. The system will use this cognitive model to favor the plans respecting the most this curve. It also allows the system to think about the information it may expose to the user to maximize or minimize suspense when needed. That's it for the presentation of this paper. As I said at the beginning of the video, it's very regularly cited by researchers because it really put again planning at the front stage as a well-suited tool for interactive storytelling. Today, nearly 20 years after, planning still has its predominant place in interactive storytelling. We will have the opportunity to talk more about it in other videos. Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe.